myself in the beginning, but my name is Juan Afanador, and I'm one of the board members for Solar Austin. And I'll get a little bit more into the details of it, but I'm one of the point people that helps run the events here along with Daryl. So I'll start sharing my screen and we'll share some announcements, just so you guys can kind of get an idea of who we are, right? So this is our board member staff, so we are a volunteer staff except for Beryl, who's our only part-time employee. We're also right now currently in the hunt for an executive director. So if any ideas pop to mind of someone who is really passionate about solar, about kind of digging a little bit of cross participation between different ideas and executing them, as well as fundraising and grant writing, we would definitely appreciate that application. The job is posted on LinkedIn as well as Indeed, and we will be closing out that job post pretty soon. So definitely don't snooze. So yeah, as I mentioned, we are hiring for the executive director, and please take a moment if you haven't done so already to follow us on social media. We have the traditional Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and a little bit of Instagram there, so you can stay in the know about the different things that we're doing, whether they're happy hours or events or news. So to tell you guys a little bit more about Solar Austin is that we're almost a 20-year-old organization that is the Austin chapter of the Texas Solar Energy Society. We are a 501c3 and also a 501c4 organization. And the main mission of our volunteer staff, as well as Beryl, is to just accelerate the transition to clean and renewable energies. Of course, promoting the education of those and the adoption of it so that it's a more equitable adoption of solar throughout Central Texas. Our initiatives are kind of broken up into 5 main topics. We focus a little bit on policy advocacy that is led by Kaiba, who is our president, and she also works with Public Citizen. Events and outreach led by myself. Then there's solar education, which is led by Jessica Harris. The Pathways program, which is a mix of Kaiba and Beryl, and you'll learn a little bit more about it in a couple of their slides, as well as community installations, in which we are trying to promote donated solar systems to other nonprofits or other community resiliency centers around Austin or Central Texas. That is led mostly by Stan. Beryl can speak a little bit more about the program that she helps manage here, as well as what is going on right now and what is happening in the next few months.
Thank you, Juan. Yes, so the Pathways to Clean Energy Careers program, it was launched about a year ago, thanks to this grant from the city of Austin. The mission of this program has always been to facilitate equitable and inclusive pathways for women students and students of color into the clean energy industry so that they could kickstart their clean energy career. We have been able to place a number of interns this spring, and we're actually moving forward with summer placements as we speak. So we are on the lookout for folks who would be interested in mentoring students through this program. And that would look like having a cup of coffee with a student once a week, just to be able to talk about what different paths in clean energy look like. Another pathway for involvement would be actually hosting an intern. So if your company is looking to engage young talent or just looking to have an extra hand on a project, we are very much looking for host companies for this summer. If that sounds of interest, you could check it out on Solar Austin's website or reach out to me at info@solaraustin.org. Thank you, Juan. Right back at you.
We also have another board member on the call, who's Andrea, and Andrea is also helping with that mentorship connection. So whether you are involved and want to provide a little bit of just guidance as to whether it's a youth that wants to get into the solar industry, or whether it's already somebody in the industry that wants to pivot take different direction, feel free to send her a message, and that way we can kind of connect, because there is a lot of demand for students that just want to speak to someone, see what it's like, see how it is that they got to where they are. So again, this is one of our flagship programs. We've been grateful with partnering with other universities, as well as receiving support from the city of Austin. So a little bit about what's been happening in the past month is that we were closely involved with the city of Pflugerville in a couple of different ways. Jessica and her team in the education committee connected with the school district in Pflugerville to support what is called the Real World program, in which different industries try to showcase their careers and to different students, so kind of a career fair. And we created a video that is available on YouTube for you to see a little bit, showing us to why some of us board members got involved in solar, how we got there, what are some tips to write a resume or interview or network for all those students that want to be in the solar industry. Again, this is with the city of Pflugerville, and I think that this is a very good time to kind of give a progress update on this 144 megawatt farm that is being built in Pflugerville. So that is the project by one of our sponsors, by Recurrent Energy. And this is a good, there's a little bit of the video if you want to see it, but it's 15 minutes. So I'd rather not present the whole thing, and I'll let you watch it in your own free time. So to speak a little bit more about the sponsors that make everything happen for us, we have a number of different tiers. Our top tier right now is Stellar sponsor. So FTC Solar has been an excellent partner in helping us, whether it's funding or whether it's with interns or mentoring. They're also followed by Recurrent, as I mentioned, Mayfield Renewables, which is a design firm, Yoda Energy, which is a startup here in Austin that is helping to pair up storage with solar underneath the panel. It's very innovative. Our megawatt sponsors include Ørsted, a major developer for wind and solar, Downtown Austin Alliance, as you've seen them help keep downtown Austin quite clean and neat, and Freedom Solar, one of the top residential and commercial installers in the state. Also joined in the next tier is Kilowatt, which we have Hush and Blackwell, which is a law firm focusing on renewable energies, HEB, They Might Be Monkeys, Z Prime, and PowerFin Partners. Another side of Kilowatts is Pipermatics, which is a solar recruitment firm with offices here in, actually not just solar, renewable energy recruitment firm with offices here in Austin. Also CD Green Tech, distributor, SunPro, and Lighthouse, other installers here. And we have one last page here, welcoming our newest sponsor, which is Greenhawk Business Services. Carol over there was kind enough to join our sponsorship list, and she provides bookkeeping for sustainable businesses. Also joined by Clean Power Marketing, Nancy, I see that you're on the call. She helps with marketing help, Greenbelt Solar, which is an installer, Harris Energy Solutions, Greener by Design, and the Deering Group. And if you're interested in helping us out, I think minimum donation can be anything you're willing to donate. We definitely support that, as we can support Barrel's paycheck at the same time of other initiatives such as the donated installations and the rest of our program upkeep. So feel free to send us an email at info@SolarAustin or scan the QR code if you're interested. And now I think that we'll kind of start introducing our speakers. We'll be joined today by Senator Jose Menendez, who will be coming right off the floor, actually, who I just got a text. But so take a moment to read the bio while I catch up, because I think that there's some notices here. Yeah, that he's a little bit delayed because the session is still continuing. So he should be on his way. But long story short, today he did speak about Senate Bill 383, I believe is the number, in which he's proposing for better transparency when it comes to distributed generation. So I'll let him speak a little bit more about that for 20 minutes, followed by a 10-minute Q&A session. And then at 6:30, then we'll pass it off to Charlie Hemmeline. Charlie is the executive director, also joined us already, for Texas Solar Power Association. They are a trade organization, kind of showing a little bit about the industry, whether it is from the installer, the developer, or the manufacturer. He's still, he hasn't been deeply involved with energy policy at a national level, and we're thankful for his time and being able to join us here in a more local stance. So he's a wealth of knowledge, and I'm very much looking forward to understanding as to what is going on in the state capitol. There's so many energy bills after, but even before the February event, So very much looking forward to understanding how we can do our part to support and what is needed to get done and what challenges lay ahead. Thanks. I'll wait a second and then see if any of his aides are on, which actually she is. Alicia.
And we will be having, leaving 10 minutes after Senator Menendez speaks for a Q&A, and a chunk of time also after Charlie Hemmeline speaks for a Q&A. So we do request just entering any questions you may have into the chat, or just waiting for after their presentations to pose a question. Thank you all.
But maybe even in the meantime, I'm curious to know what it is that you guys want to learn the most and get the most out of this happy hour. Perhaps like, why is it that you joined us today to participate? So I'd welcome either unmuting of mics or just replying on the chat box over there.
I'll kick it off. I'll do the awkward thing. I'm Nancy Edwards. I just like seeing my fellow Austin Solar buddies, and also always good to hear a state of the industry from the Texas perspective.
Thanks. Thanks, Nancy. Do you feel like you've had other opportunities this year, since we're a little bit more on the virtual end, to have some sort of state of the industry in Texas update?
I'll go ahead and pitch in. This is Christopher Summers, longtime solar advocate and EV enthusiast. I've actually seen Charlie do a presentation to several years ago to the Texas Solar Power Association. So I'm interested to see how things have changed in the last 3 years as far as new projects that have come online and others that are currently in the pipeline for expanding the grid. But also, more importantly, obviously, we've just come off of Snowmageddon. And I'd like to see what changes are afoot, or proposed changes to the Texas grid that had been proposed decades ago that still have yet to be implemented, that are now going to be looked at for implementation.
That's quite the question that many of us have, and I resonate with that. And I think it's very timely, because I've asked Charlie to speak with us maybe a few months back. So I'm excited that now there's another sort of event that made solar plus storage a little bit more of a relevant conversation in reality. So thanks, Chris. Is anyone else interested in learning something different other than policy? Is about maybe questions about a specific bill, questions about something that is outside of the scope?
I have a question.
Of course.
My name's Colette Neese. I was wondering if y'all had specific strategies that you're using to approach conversations that are not necessarily based in the factual data that kind of went on with ERCOT and everything. And so strategies to kind of bring together the polarization. Yeah,
I would say that I think that we err on the side of science, right? And we want to showcase kind of like the facts. And I think that what some of our board members were able to do was write up some published articles that got published in solar media, kind of explaining the facts, explaining about like, this was the amount of generation that happened by X, Y, and Z energy source, as well as like, hey, this is the history of the situation. And we definitely kind of want to stay away from politics and just kind of speak a little bit about what needs to be done. So I can send you those articles. As far as like a set strategy, it's more about telling the story of what each person is feeling or what each person experienced. But David Brearley, who I don't know if he's on the call, he's one of our board members. He's written about it, and Kayeba can speak more about this, who's also on the call over there. She's our president. I think.
Yeah, I guess,
Thanks.
you know, I think the positive thing maybe that has come out of this is everybody has their eye on Texas energy issues right now, on ERCOT issues, whereas, you know, in the past, I think most of our lawmakers, and certainly the public, didn't even know what ERCOT was or what they did. So, you know, it's nice that they're finally interested, I guess, in some respects. You know, I think the downside is you can't learn this stuff in a month. And so now, you know, trying to make solutions that are often complicated, making policy that quickly is difficult. And I don't really have an illusion that there's going to be a solution in this session, but I do see it as an opportunity to have some more conversations and for folks to realize the importance of paying attention to these issues.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I see that the senator has joined us, so I'm going to give him permission to co-host, and so he can speak a little bit. He is under the pseudonym of Pearl Cruz today.
What's that?
You're under the pseudonym of Pearl Cruz.
Oh yeah. I'm at Pearl's desk because my 14-year-old is sitting at my computer right now in my office. Yeah, you know, I just the things we got to do. Hey everybody, how are y'all? I hope everyone's okay. It's been you know, it's been crazy. I want to thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak about what's going on with solar business policy in Texas. I don't need to tell you guys that we rank second in the nation for solar energy production with over $8 million in solar production. And so, you know, it's the positive, the good news. You know, we know that we've got about 10,000 jobs that solar produces. Hold on a second. Okay. So, you know, I mean, for me, it's an easy in terms of what's going on to understand that in Texas, especially with elected officials, I mean, they're getting the same complaints that I'm getting from constituents about what are you going to do to make sure this never happens again, and what plan. And so there, in my opinion, it appears as if they're looking for a scapegoat. Too many, I guess, maybe too many friends on the other side of the other production generation. I'm not sure which one it is. Or maybe it's just the simple fact that they think that intermittent power generation is just, you know, what they're saying is just not reliable enough, even though we know the facts show that solar and nuclear were the two most reliable forms of energy production that we had during the storm. So I think while we're having these debates and these discussions, I think it's vital that we continue to have the conversations with the electeds and impress upon them how important these resources are. You know, today we heard Senate Bill 398, the Solar Bill of Rights, and I think it got a good hearing. I think it's going to come out and, you know, go to the floor, and I think it'll have the same welcome response. I think that it will also do well in the House. You know, I'm not running around telling people in the media that the Speaker and the House of Representatives are somehow not anything less than straightforward. And so, I mean, I'm not picking fights with them. And so I don't think we should. I think at this point, and I think that everyone in the renewable space has done a good job of being very professional and direct and trying to just present the facts. I'm hopeful that when we get to the House that these issues can prevail And I'm hopeful that will allow us to see a more preponderance of individuals and small commercial customers to install more solar energy on their property based on the SB 398 and the protections that it should provide them. Y'all know what's in there and you know why we need it. I think, the elephant in the room is what y'all were talking about before I started, which is, are they going to try to shove more cost for variability down onto renewables? I think it was evident for me from the very beginning of the hearings on the winter storm that the renewables had a target on their back, and they wanted to sort of blame this on them because they didn't want to look at natural gas and the other thermal productions that they think they can just start. So this is the other thing that I've been doing. I've been trying to, like today, just a few minutes ago, in the BNC as we were voting, redirect the conversation also to demand response and other forms of conservation that we can use that are even more immediate than any kind of thermal that you can ask for. So we've got to figure it out. This dialogue is important, and every single source is important, but renewables are the cheapest. And that's the other thing, is that where I think we can get some traction, if you will, with the people who are in charge, is by reaching out to the business community, because the great news is that, and they've had to admit that the renewables, other than conservation, is the least expensive form of energy. And so I'm working every single angle that I can think of to make sure that we can stop the attacks and stop anything that would be detrimental to the expansion of renewable energy in the state of Texas. I think that today's amendment in BNC by Hancock was a little better in the sense that even though he wants renewables to play a role in offsetting the ancillary service charges or in somehow become a stronger partner in taking out some of the variability, that he wants to see what y'all would do, but at least you can, instead of giving the money to ERCOT, you can invest it in your own systems. As I was texting with some folks in the industry about this, they're like, well, hey, this is just bad in general. I'm like, yeah, I agree. But if it allows you to make investments and say that these investments that you're making, and whether it be on-site battery storage or, weatherization or anything that you can do, that you can say, look, I've invested in improving my generation and it's going to be more reliable. Well, then at that point, I think it makes it a lot harder for them to say you've not played that role, and you still have ERCOT saying, well, what is the role? ERCOT will have the PUC, and the PUC is going to have to make the rules by sometime in January, I believe. We don't even know, there's no one at the PUC, so I don't know who's going to be making the rules. So we've got a lot. There's a long way to go. All of these things are moving targets, but the good news is y'all are well represented. I think Charlie did a good job. I think everybody that's been presenting has done a good job. And, we're going to continue to do but everyone's got to use their personal relationships with legislators. I think in the House, you get a lot more traction in the sense that I know for a fact there are quite a few Republicans who are West Texas members who wind and solar have been sort of godsends in the sense, that y'all were providing revenue to families who, aren't members of any kind of shell play and can't grow anything out there. And so, in the community, you were really welcomed. And so I know for a long time, Drew Darby has been there. I mean, in my days on state affairs in the House, I remember these things when we were trying to make solar, find ways to get it, programs to help everyday citizens be able to put solar on their house, be able to afford it. And I mean, I long for those days that we could figure out a way, possibly to, even if we could use securitization from the state or use somehow, some way for solar not to be just something for folks who could afford the expensive systems, that it would be an everyday everyday American could have solar or have a neighborhood-based co-op of some kind, some solar. We got to figure it out. I think we have to do a better job. One of the things that I've talked about for a long time that maybe y'all can help with would be to take cities where you have a municipally owned utility provider and possibly a municipally owned water system. So I know one of them for sure, like San Antonio, and create like a sustainable, we have historically, San Antonio's got a parade of homes where the builders all get together and create these beautiful homes with the latest and greatest things in them. And they're very expensive, typically in the nicest parts of town. Well, many of us, when I was on council, we forced them to do an affordable parade of homes, which is great. You get Habitat involved. What I'd like to see happen that I haven't seen or heard anybody do is a sustainable or green or, reliable parade of homes. Like how can you get the most energy efficient homes neighborhood built as a neighborhood?
Mm-hmm.
And you do it on homes that are affordable or middle class, so that it doesn't just seem like, well, this is just for wealthy liberals, but this is for everyday Texans. Because the problem is, as we all know, builders aren't going to go experiment on something if they don't think they can make money on it.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can build a neighborhood that has renewable, that has rainwater recapture, that has so many things that actually bring the cost of owning the home down, that it's so much that they pay, all of these things pay for themselves. That actually also could be a form of development that we could encourage that would help provide housing, that safe, affordable, quality housing, single family, detached, which is what a lot of politicians want, especially my Republican friends, and do this in a way that builders could say, yeah, and we can actually earn a living doing this sort of thing. I'm sure that there's examples in Austin of this sort of thing, but I'd like to see them go statewide. That's all I have. I'm ready for any questions, comments, or rude remarks. Everything's welcome. It's been a long day. I'll be happy to take whatever you have.
Thank you so much, Senator. I think that was a very good summary, and I know that it's been a long day since you were speaking about the 398 bill today, right? How did that go? Where does that stand right now in the process? And
so it went well. I mean, I think that bill would have been already out of committee had I not tagged the voter suppression shit that they put in, up a few weeks ago. And so I was one of 5 Democrats that put a tag on, which is a term of art around here that just says it's we delayed the voter suppression bills and caused them, instead of to be heard on the day they wanted them to heard. I guess it was a Tuesday they wanted them. We forced them to have them go Friday until about midnight or whatever. So they delayed the bill. I mean, okay, I have 1 million or so people that live in my Senate district back home in Barrett County. Their right to vote is as important, if not more important. I just can't. I got to stand up for people's right to vote, whether they want to vote after 7 or on a weekend or whenever they want to vote, or vote by mail. So it's hard, and I apologize for anybody that But I don't think it's been delayed to the point of anything dying. So I think we'll get it voted out. When do you think we'll vote next?
Maybe tomorrow. Some of the election legislations tomorrow.
We might vote tomorrow. So if we vote tomorrow, it'll be on its way. And it's been through the Senate unanimously before. So I'm not really worried about it, to be honest with you. It died in calendars for whatever reason in the House. It's okay. We'll get it done. I'm not worried about it. I think it makes sense. I think most people like personal property rights, and just because it has solar, it shouldn't slow it down that much. But that's what I know about it so far. It's in the hands of the committee chair and the work group. So whenever the next committee hearing is for voting bills out.
okay. So you mentioned that this is the Solar Bill of Rights. So this is Senate Bill 398. Are there any other bills that you feel like are extremely important, whether it comes for solar specifically, or perhaps for neighborhood cooperatives, or even storage as well?
I can't think off the top of my head. We've got about 115 bills filed. So I get dizzy just trying to think about all of them. You think anything you can think of right now?
We have a couple of ERCOT bills.
We got some ERCOT bills that we're working on, but I'd like to honestly, I'd like us to see what we can do. Look, reality is we got to see what amendments can we tack on to bills that are actually going to be moving. So these are going to be bills, probably bills by Hancock, that we're going to have to talk him into to see if he can improve some of his legislation. And so that's, I guess, the more realistic route, to be honest with you, and on our side. And then you got to have a differing opinion on the other side. I don't know who's the chair of state affairs in the House. Who can tell me who's running state affairs? Anybody?
That's Chris Patty.
Chris. Okay. Well, then I don't know if Chris is a fan or not. I don't know where he lies on this. I'd know that if Darby was there, he would be involved. If Byron Cook were there, he'd be interested. I think Byron, we got to find Republicans who are supportive of this to make it go. But I think overall the atmosphere seems to be a little easier to work with in the House, as far as I can tell. I haven't been over there with COVID. We're keeping ourselves apart. They're not testing everybody as they go in. They're not all wearing masks, and so we're trying to be a little careful not to take COVID home, not to pick it up anywhere and spread it around.
Are there any particular amendments that you are going to be pushing for? When you look at the priorities, what priorities in terms of amendments do you think that you may consider?
Well, Kenneth, I think if we're going to do amendments, I think we have to play some defense. I think we've made some small incremental benefits in terms of, I think when the hearings started, the 25 hours of hearings on the storm, I felt as if there was a huge target on the back of all renewable sources. And I thought it was going to be a bad session in terms of renewables. We're going to pay the price. As things have improved, I think people have been listening and seeing. And I think even Chairman Hancock's, his rhetoric has calmed down significantly. And I think so I don't have specifics other than how can we first make sure that they don't do no harm. And then if there are going to be situations, then let's go ahead and start fixing these things. You know what I'm saying? Let's see what we can do. I don't have any specifics other than my bill. I'd like to see today. I will tell you all, I had an interesting conversation with another person that's been that's getting a leadership position on the Senate that I made some inroads with potentially having a member of the public at large on ERCOT's board. And so I think that's a huge paradigm shift from where, everybody here has been, all about, industry being on there. And so I think we're moving. I think there's been so much pressure from the community at large on legislators about what happened that they're more interested in seeing everyday citizens playing a role. And so I think that's positive. And so where I was going was if we could get businesses, especially if there are businesses that are invested in renewable energy sources, to put some pressure on legislators, I think that would help us.
Okay. The call to action has been taken note of. I do see a question from Jim over there. If you would care to comment on Bill 11 that just passed the Senate.
Which one's SB 11? I'm trying to remember. Do you remember?
SB 11 that passed yours. That hasn't passed yet. SB 11 hasn't passed.
Hasn't passed yet. SB 11.
That's a jurisprudence bill. That's going to be heard on Thursday.
Oh, on the floor?
In jurisprudence in the committee.
So jurisprudence, SB 11 is going to be heard in criminal jurisprudence on Thursday. So it has not passed out of the Senate.
Okay.
It's related to the composition of the Court of Appeals districts.
Oh yeah, that's not that. I wouldn't.
Different topic.
I'm familiar with SB 11. If that's what you're still referring about, the redistricting of the Court of Appeals, and I'm not happy about that bill, but that's for totally different reasons. That's all about gerrymandering and trying. That's all it's about. That's all about trying to change the makeup of the courts because they don't like too many women on the all women Fourth Court of Appeal. And some people lost their races last general election and they're not happy about it.
There's also a question from Matt. He says, you noted there seemed to be a hunt blamed assigned after the February event. So why was ERCOT, who we think was unfairly targeted given they avoided the blackout, selected versus TERC, which is the Texas Energy Reliability Council, which mediates natural gas's interaction with the electric system, which has purview over where the problem was actually located?
Why was ERCOT? I think ERCOT was part of it. I think was because I thought Magnus did such a horrible job of testifying. I thought he came across as being a little, I don't know, cold, a little bit. I'm not sure if arrogant's the right word, but indifferent, a cavalier, and the reality is that when you looked at the potential when ERCOT. So they heard, when you look at the 25 hours of testimony in the Senate, I can't only speak for the time I was sitting there, and you heard of the precipitous drop in the load shed and how it created that infrequency, that the drop of our frequency dropped so quickly, so fast that it created some trips in some of the generators for self-protection. It created a thought that it was ERCOT that failed in managing the actual need to shed load. It could be a combination of it was trying to shed load, generation wasn't coming on. They put the demand in and then they figured out, oh boy, lines are frozen, or I don't have enough natural gas in the system to pop those whatever they call those little instant on generators that they charge a ton of money for, the ancillary services. And then when he made the decision to hold the power at 9,000 watts, even though we were building reserve, because he was concerned that the industrial demand in the morning but we were still in EE 2 or 3 status where you can't turn generation off once it's on. So I just think Magnus did a horrible job, and I honestly I agree that it wasn't just ERCOT. I think it was the PUC was horrible, but if you recall, ERCOT testified, Magnus testified he wouldn't do anything different. Over 100 people died. At the time we didn't know how many, but we knew people had died. And I think the other thing is there was anger statewide in all corners of all constituencies. But then for so many of us, when you saw the pictures of downtown Austin lit up like a Christmas tree and everything east of 35 dark, that just magnified the anger for so many of us, and the questions in so many of our communities, in terms of how did they chose to turn who off, who got turned off and why? And because, then we started asking ourselves, rightly, wrongly, or indifferent, if it's our communities of color or poorer communities whose lights are off, you start wondering, is it just us? And so, no, we ended up finding out, no, it wasn't. That's not the way it worked. But there just seemed to be extremely poor communication. I think the PUC, I think it's evident from what we've learned since then that the commissioners at the PUC were worthless, and talk about being too close to industry. I asked a question, is this guy that we're going to ask to be fired, is he going to be able to just turn around and get hired by one of these people that he said he was going to go protect their windfall, and unfortunately, yeah, he can just turn around and get hired by any of those folks. And so if it were up to me, I'd combine the PUC and the Railroad Commission, and I'd put them in a more accountable position. I'd put some elected along with elected officials along with some appointed to provide some oversight, because I don't trust too many of these appointments are just plums for people who are just too cozy with the folks in leadership.
Thank you. I think that we have time for like maybe one more question or two, but the first one from Kaiva, who's like, why was the Railroad Commission and the natural gas industry so easily escaped from accountability? Maybe.
You're recording this. You really want me to tell you the truth? I mean, come on.
we can table it then. Thank you.
I mean, we know why. You know, I mean, come on. Why? Because billions of dollars. You know, I mean, the people who own Energy Transfer. Come on, we don't need to know. I mean, we know why. Yeah.
I think sometimes though, from my perspective, just as a younger citizen, you know, at the same time there isn't so much clarity or transparency when you dig into it, right? And when you try to understand, hey, these are people that were elected as a railroad commission, and we understand it falls into them. So why aren't they being brought up? But yeah,
because they're on the same team.
Okay.
I mean, they're all on the same team. You know, it's just they're friends. They all go to the same exact parties and stuff. You know, there's only 3 of them. You know, and so we don't have any of them on a side that's a little bit more, I think, consumer based, consumer oriented. Maybe more science based. I mean, you know, it's all about drill, baby, drill, you know?
Yeah.
So anyhow.
So looking at the larger scheme of things, how would you kind of measure the progress of legislation, whether it's pro distributed generation or pro utility scale generation? Where do you see that things, you know, are maybe closer to the finish line where we hope that it is? You know, how are things advancing from your perspective across different segments of solar?
It's way too early to tell.
Okay. Lots of work to do.
It's too early to tell. I will tell you that we're in better shape than we were at the end of the first hearing. I think at the end of the first hearing, I was prepared for all sorts of havoc coming down on the backs of all renewable energy sources. And so we've had to use, you know, I think we need to use a full-blown campaign, to be honest with you, the PR campaign that says, here are the facts. You know, solar promised X number of kilowatts or gigawatts, and they delivered, you know, everything but. Here are the percentages. I tried to get ERCOT to show me. He had a graph when he testified of which source of generation failed the most, and so at the very bottom, the 2 sources that failed the least were solar and nuclear. Okay, the problem that I didn't have was what percentage of promise versus delivered, number 1, and number 2, how much are we talking about? You know, how much did you get from nukes, and how much did you get from solar? Because I mean, if I can compare apples to apples, then I'm like, well, all we need is more solar farms.
I'll let you know that one of our board members is the answer for that. Matt over there kind of written up an internal document, just comparing that, and it was just for internal discussion because of what was expected for the month of February, you know, as a traditional sense, and what was the percentage that was delivered. You know, I think that Matt can speak more about it, but there was, I think, overperformance when it came from the solar side sometimes.
Probably. So I probably agree. I mean,
I will send you that table.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I'd be surprised if you guys didn't already have some. Okay, you know, y'all are all, well, those of you who are old enough to remember your windshield, your rear window, when you could hit the little defrost button and they had the little wires in them and stuff, and they would just melt everything. I'd be surprised if that technology didn't exist for solar panels out there already, probably running off a battery, if you will. Now, one of the other things that nobody was talking about for a while was that congestion on I've heard that congestion on the transmission lines has kept some of the solar generation from coming from your farms into the cities when it was needed, that there was some congestion. There was a problem with actual transmission. There was some congestion of some kind. I don't know these things, you know. Here's the other thing. Y'all want to know, why is it so easy for people to get away with stuff? Because this is hyper complicated.
Yeah.
This stuff is unbelievable. Like, I'm looking at all of y'all that I can see, and I'm like, I don't know. I barely know 1 or 2 of y'all in here. And I know I've been doing this for 20 years. I mean, literally, I was like, why don't I know more of these people? I'm like, this is a super complicated issue. And, you know, thank goodness, you know, if it's not Charlie Cyrus is doing a damn good job, at all the committee hearings and speaking up. And the good news is that he takes a very reasonable approach to an environmental issue. He tries to be as reasonable as possible, and it makes it easier to get some stuff in there with people who typically aren't interested in hearing what we're trying to do.
Well, you know that you can contact us and your team can contact us and we can support you. I want to thank you for all the championship that you're doing for us. You're a leader in our space and helping us get more solar out there and harness the power of renewables. Thank you, Senator, for your time, for your
Real
comments.
quick, I just saw something in here that's really important. Is it Colette? She put in here that she went to city council. Wait a minute, I lost it. Renewables was 40% of their futures portfolio, and they were only part that was green. So, okay, so the city of New
Just
Braunfels.
ate a cracker. I'm sorry.
What?
They gave like a 2-hour presentation
Okay.
and just kind of broke down what happened. NBU's a pretty tight-fisted corporation here, and that when you looked at where they had to buy for each particular day when things were off grid and everything, the only part that showed profit in green were renewables. And they said there's no way that they would have made out like they did. They said they only had like just a handful of turbines and panels that did not produce, but pretty much everything did. And somebody stood up, it's actually a friend of mine stood up and asked, then why don't you have more of your portfolio? And he said, because the public hasn't asked for it.
So can you get those people at the Braunfels City Council through Senator Campbell, because she lives in New Braunfels. And you need to
Really lives in Austin.
Huh?
She really lives in Austin.
Well, wherever. She most of her votes come out of Comal.
They do.
Okay, so most of her votes come out. Comal keeps her here. So y'all should go. I hate the fact that you're recording this shit. Y'all keep her here, so y'all need to reach out.
We can omit it. Yeah, we can omit it if needed. We can stop the recording and edit it if needed.
It just makes it harder for me because I try to be straight, and I think it's important for them to hear from the people where they're seeing the reality. And the city of New Braunfels and their utilities said, "Oh wow, it was renewables that did what it that helped us." She needs to hear that. Because right now, as of today, when I heard her say, "Well, you're right. It's just you can't count on them. They're variable. They're intermittent, and so they're not always going to be there." And so we. From
my experience, she doesn't get on board a lot with a lot of ecological issues.
Yes, but there got to be some conservatives on that city council that she would listen to. There has to be.
Yeah.
And they're worried about is how do they make their ends meet. If their New Braunfels utilities is helping them with their prices, then there's got to be someone that can talk to her that says, can understand. And that's my gut, my political gut tells me that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Elsie. But and she's on the State of Affairs Committee, isn't she?
Yep. Well, yeah. She's on a bunch of committees that make a difference. She's on Business and Commerce. That's the one that's going to be hearing all these things. So it's important that she gets this information as soon as possible, because she could make a difference in the conversations. Today she was all over the amendment to make renewables pay more, and because I was trying to say, well, and I think others were trying to say, well, if there was outages of all generation sources, then shouldn't we have them all pay? I mean, that they should all be a part of the ancillary services. But the chairman's convinced that renewable power has had have had such great financial incentives to develop that it's time to level the playing field. That's if I had to summarize his feelings, that's what I would say. Oh, I'm worried about this. I see when were the recording missed? When will it be sent? Well, if y'all can just keep it amongst yourselves, that'd be great.
Yeah, we can do so.
All right.
You can just tell us.
All right. Anything else? Other questions, comments, rude remarks? All right.
Not from my end. Anyone else?
I think we
Just
have a
wanted to
question. from-
thank the senator for this great work today at the committee. I was there for the full time. A lot of bills, a lot of electricity conversation, and really appreciate you continuing to stand up for solar and renewables and work with us. It's great.
Well, you've been very helpful. Pearl and my team has worked closely with you and Doug Llewellyn and Sandy and others. And it's been very, very difficult to get up to speed, to get proficient with this, especially when you're dealing with someone who's had years of a head start on this issue. And I it's not that I'm expecting to be as equally well versed in a few months as Kelly Hancock, but I want to try to get both sides of the story out, because I believe strongly that we need to be thinking long-term in the health of our climate, of our nation. And I think the more we invest in renewables, the better it is for us as a community. Even if we do pay a little bit more, it's a long-term benefit to our community. So thank you all for what y'all do. Take care, guys. Be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Have a safe drive.
Get your vaccine.
Thank you, everyone. I think that, Charlie, that's a very good segue kind of like to your side of the game. It sounds like you're heavily involved briefing all the senators on, our industry, on what happens like kind of on the boots of the ground. So very much looking forward to continuing the conversation. Appreciate everyone's questions on the chat box too. We'll be editing the video as in due time, but as you can tell, he could use our support. He could use our support, understanding what is our story, and seeing where the level of support needs to come from in terms of businesses or residences or the utilities. So Charlie, I'll hand off the mic to you so that you can educate us a little bit better on Senate bills and kind of how you've seen the state of solar change from last year to this year, and where you see that the next big challenges lay.
You bet. Thank you for having me. Good to see you all again. So many old friends in the crew and some new friends. So appreciate the invitation and can't wait until we can all actually be at Schultz's or wherever in person as soon as possible. I've got a handful of slides. I thought I'd kind of give a quick market update, some things over the past year or two of interest, and look at some of the numbers, then talk about resource adequacy and the winter event and some of the things there that we've kind of talked about, and then talk about the legislative session. There's a lot going on. So I just picked out some things. Let's see if I can share that. How does that look? Can y'all see that?
Crystal clear.
Brilliant. Awesome. Well, y'all hopefully know TSPA, we're the state trade association for solar companies that do work here in Texas on both the wholesale side, large scale power plant development, and all the products and services that go along with that, into residential and commercial rooftop, and all the companies that do work in that sector. So it's quite a wide variety of companies, all up and down the supply chain, a bunch of Texas-based companies, some national and international companies, basically whoever's doing big work in Texas and always growing. So if you're a solar company that wants to get more plugged in the legislature and the policy side, advocacy, networking with the industry, all those things, please let me know and we'll get you plugged in. A lot going on right now. Like I said, just hit on some market developments and some of the questions that were asked earlier about kind of the last year and the past couple years, and then talk about the storm and some of the resource adequacy concerns. And then this session, I have 320 bills on my list, so we'll just take them one by one. I'm just kidding. We will not do all of those. I do have 320 bills on my list. We will not do that, but we'll just do a few. You all, this is an energy savvy crowd, but I always just like to do a couple of the big picture numbers. We are starting from a small number here. The Texas grid is large. The population is large. We need a lot of power. So the amount of solar that we produced in 2020 was 2.3% of our generation. So, something, we're more than 1%. We crossed that last year. We're soon to get out of this other wedge, but we are still the smallest overall kind of piece among the major sources here. But among states, we're climbing up the charts. We are already second. on the list. We've been second in 2018, 2019, and 2020. We're now second cumulatively. And if you can see the actual installation numbers there, usually it's California by just a mile. This time we almost caught them. We almost did as much in 2020 as California did. We've opened up leads on the others that we were closer to. A lot of dynamism among states. It's always kind of been that way. It's almost a different top 10 every year. South Carolina is almost catching North Carolina. North Carolina was second, and now it's us, and South Carolina is catching them. So it's very dynamic, but we have, really started to grow, and it's exciting, and we're in a better place now. Well, I'll share some numbers. The distributed generation numbers are a little harder to come by. The residential and commercial installs, because they don't get reported with quite the same frequency that ERCOT reports wholesale power plant stuff. So you have to just compile them when you can get them. As it turns out, these numbers are just being released right now for 2020. So this is the compilation of distributed less than 1 megawatt installations in the various transmission distribution utility spaces through 2019. And you can see 2019 was everybody's best year ever by far. CenterPoint, more than doubled. Encore practically doubled. The others did too. So, a real tip there. I only had, literally, I saw that a bunch of these numbers for 2020 were posted today, and I had like 30 minutes to try to scramble through them. And I will show you that we had, for 2020 in Encore, they went from 68 megawatts in 2019 to 122. They basically doubled their installs. This is just what they did in 2020. That's not cumulative. So 13,000 installations, 122 megawatts. CenterPoint did 4,500 installations, 40 megawatts more than 2019. So even in a pandemic, even in a year of uncertainty, those two major utilities did more rooftop and distributed solar than ever before. So that was exciting. As I saw these 2019 numbers, I was hoping that it wasn't just a blip and they kind of went back to whatever. And it's nice to see both those going up. I'll get into the other utilities hopefully soon to share a more comprehensive picture. But so far so good on those numbers. And that's the word I'm hearing from our member companies that do work. 2020 was a banner year. This year so far has been tremendous for a lot of reasons. And so hopefully we've really hit that tip point for distributed. We hit it, I think 2 years ago or, 18 months ago in the wholesale side where the installations really started to come up. And I think a little bit of a lag on the distributed side, but now that's happening. And so that's awesome. Here's the wholesale side. Like I said, a little bit easier to grab numbers because ERCOT compiles them collectively. 2020, also our best year ever, practically almost doubled our total amount of solar that was installed in large scale power plants all across the state. And the main driver was that we've just contracted for a lot more power production. A lot of companies, mainstream corporations, oil and gas companies, more cities, more municipal and co-op utilities have started to contract for large scale solar, which gives the developers the kind of push to be able to go get the project financed and built. So, the past 2 to 3 years, we saw a ton of contracting activity, which then led to a ton of build, which started in 2020 and is now really starting to come up in the next couple of years. So this is the same chart I showed before through 2020, now extended through 23. This is what ERCOT is expecting to come online in these years. So the solid blue at the bottom is what's already been built and commercially operational. The light blue, 1,951 megawatts, has been built and is in the last stages of becoming commercially operational. And then the red and the green are, they have their signed interconnection agreements and they're in fairly late stage development. So those aren't absolutely guaranteed to come online in the year indicated, but they've reached a fairly late stage in the process, and that's the plan as far as ERCOT knows. Some of these may get pushed a year, pushed a little bit further, some of those bigger numbers may not end up panning out, but this isn't the full development queue. This is just what's planning to come online in these years. So there's actually even much more than this in earlier stages of development. So quite a lot happening. And it's happening all over the state. The earliest large scale installations were here, kind of central Texas, Austin, San Antonio. And then we built out another wave further out west, the first 100+ megawatt projects. Everybody went to Pecos County and Andrews and Upton because that's where the best sun is. But in the past year and a half, they've really diversified their locations a lot more in the Houston area, or close to the Houston area, the Ship Channel and the Gulf of Mexico area, more in the Dallas area and south and north. So, going to where you have available land and other things. So 63 counties have projects either online or were represented in that previous chart where you have interconnection agreements and fairly late stage. So pretty great, spread. Definitely a good story. The senator was talking about storytelling and the message, and this has always been a huge part of it, is that we have such a homogeneous resource. Literally every community can take advantage of solar on the roof and in large scale. You don't have to happen to be on an oil and gas field or happen to have solid wind resource, which is a little bit more geographic, or other things. Literally everyone has solar. And so it makes sense to develop it. And then the storm happened. So all this was happening, a lot of growth. I don't have a whole bunch of storm slides, but did just want to point this one out. The senator mentioned this, and y'all have looked at these numbers. Obviously, we didn't have enough generation for that the freeze week. Just too much was out. Load was higher than it ever was before in winter, and would have reached highest that it's ever been in ERCOT ever had we not curtailed it, had we not rolled it, which is just tremendous. I'm sure you all have talked about this for the past 6 weeks. Texas is now a winter state too, a winter peaking generation situation. And so that's been a huge part of the challenge of thinking about how to respond, is we plan for summer peaks. That's just how this market is. That's when we've needed the most power. Most of the stakeholders organize around, we might have some real scarcity for a few hours in July and August, and just gear towards that. And, don't want to see rolling brownouts or blackouts, but usually it would just be for a few hours for a few people. And what the winter storm showed, that, in winter, it's a different story, and it just doesn't get any warm. It may not get any warmer for a few days. And if something's frozen, it's frozen. And so that, that's really affected a lot of the conversation. It was such a serious event. I never wanted to trumpet solar too much. We're not out here to say, you should have used more solar. We would have saved the day, because it was a tragedy. And the fact is, the system, ERCOT, doesn't rely on solar to a great extent in the winter, because we tend to have our winter peaks come either overnight or first thing in the morning, like at 7 a.m., 8 a.m., when it's still very cold, but people are waking up and turning everything on and going to work, and the offices are coming up. And so it's those hours that the grid tends to need the most power in the winter. And that's not when solar is producing. And so ERCOT, in their plans for the season, they know we're going to be active in the summer. At 3 o'clock on a July day, we're cranking. So 80% of solar's capacity is counted on in the summer for peak. In the winter, it was 0.5%. They only, even though we had gigawatts of capacity built, nobody was under any illusion that it was going to be producing at 7 o'clock in the morning to a large extent. So ERCOT was only counting on 269 megawatts of solar to be producing on the peak, which is kind of a point time, a peak hour. But what we faced in February was 5 days of peak. We just literally went through a 5-day shortage situation. So this shows how solar produced during that time, obviously well above that number for most hours of the event, because the peak lasted into the daytime. And so, just want to, the communications that we've had with the legislature and others is, yes, like everybody, we had some challenges, but solar produced, far more than we were counted on for the season, and we made a great contribution. And so that was an important second version of the chart by the percent of the demand met by solar. So we, reached almost 8% of electricity demand was met by solar by Wednesday. The sun was out and we were cranking.
Charlie, while we're on the subject, I do have a question for you. Do you feel that this narrative changed by adding storage to the conversation, whether it was for winterization or for kind of preparing for summer peaks? Was storage added into like how we can be better prepared and be more resilient for the future, or is it just like, hey, we need to generate more?
Storage is, kind of in all of the electricity conversations now, but from a resource adequacy perspective, certainly if you're looking at a multi-event, like you have to recharge the storage. And so where we are right now, there's not a ton of storage online. There's several gigawatts in development, but the more likely role for grid reliability for storage in the near term is kind of a few hours on either side of an event, or smoothing out your profile, or locational effects. Storage isn't really gonna make up a multi-gigawatt difference in power availability for extended periods of time. So it's still more of a targeted application. We've always been very pro storage, but also be very cognizant of what is positioned to do and what not to do. So we'll see more about that.
Okay.
So solar did well. We did see some challenges. Most of them, frankly, were external. So a lot of what some of the other generators heard, that their plants weren't being powered, and so therefore they couldn't run their plants. Communication systems were down. External transmission lines had challenges. So a lot of what kept us from producing it at our maximum ability were external things. Solar equipment basically fared well. The stuff is always outside, and it's basically the same equipment that you have in more northern climates. So the panels, the inverters, the tracking systems are rated to very, very cold temperatures. So no inherent challenge with cold with solar. And in fact, produces more in the cold. This is the funny thing, that we produce more when it's cold than when it's hot because of resistance. So a little bit of a boost there. But all that to say, for the event specific bit for the winter, solar was a very small part of the story. Like, we weren't counted on. Nobody was surprised by solar's output because that wasn't a part of the resource adequacy plan. If this had been a summer event, we've been very much more looking at, okay, we counted on a lot of solar, what happened? And so we'll talk about summer. So resource adequacy is a year-round endeavor. We need it all the time. And most of the time, like I said, we focus on the summer. And we have grown enough over the past couple of years where we are making good contributions in summer, and that's been borne out in data by actual performance. I mentioned that, Sarah, the seasonal assessment of resource adequacy. Last summer, ERCOT was expecting us to produce 2,979 megawatts at the peak hour. The peak hour ended up being on an August day, August 13th. At that time, we were producing more than that, 3,620 megawatts. So last year, and also the year before and the year before that, we were producing at or above what was expected of us on peak. And so it's given ERCOT more confidence to say, okay, this is capacity we can count on, and that's what we're trying to communicate to the legislature. Obviously it's not going to be 100% all the time. We know that the sun goes up and comes down, but if you plan, what you're going to get when. Solar is now being installed in more places across the state, which means the profile is smoother. You're not going to have as much variability, and so we can count on it. So here's what the mix looks like over the next couple of years as those new installs get added. This is the peak generation capacity during the summer. So what's going to be on an August afternoon when we're using everything we got? By 2022, solar grows to be about 16% of that mix. So quite a significant contribution, showing here, well more than nuclear, which, isn't growing, and even more than wind, because even though there's more total capacity of wind on the system, they produce more at night. And so in terms of their, daytime summer production tend to be less than what solar will be able to provide. So that's good, making that contribution. And here's what that looks like from a reserve margin perspective. Resource adequacy, what do we have to produce power, and what do we think we're going to need? Historically, we've wanted a 13.75% buffer, that much more generation than we think we need. The solar that's coming online is helping us meet and exceed that number so that we have more capacity than we think we'll need. And by 2022, much more. So that's a great story. Without solar, we wouldn't be getting, we'd be stagnating. We're not adding other resources. So solar is now a huge part of the resource adequacy picture in the summer. And again, given the winter event, we're clarifying that this is the summer picture. So very, very important. And then one last market bit. This is the fuller development map. If you look at the earlier stage development projects, it spans over 126 counties, basically half the state. Again, not expecting all these to come online anytime soon. These are earlier stage. Some of them are going to fall out for a bunch of different reasons or be extended indefinitely. But it's a good illustration of, it makes sense to investigate pretty much everywhere because the resource is good. And this is the opportunity that these communities have. This is the resource that we have. So I just try to show this to illustrate that this is a big deal and there's lots of it. And so that's good. While also, again, setting expectations, we're not going to put 50 gigawatts of solar on the grid next year or anything. Any questions on that before I slide over to policy?
I don't know if there's questions from the group, but I do have a question here, kind of tying a little bit with what the senator was mentioning as to how many of these communities in West Texas, solar renewables was kind of a godsend for these towns, right? When it came to increasing the economic activity there. Do you see that there's a way to easily quantify that to make sure that there's like local labor or local boost of economic activity, or that maybe it's more transient and we can say, hey, it's only during the development of this plant and then we're out and we move on to the next one?
Yeah, it's definitely a big jobs impact, and I actually have some slides later I put at the very end if we needed them on some tax contributions, because that's a big part of the story too, the contribution that a plant makes to a county or a school district after being built. So yeah, most of the job impact for large scale solar is in the development and construction process. That's when you have a bunch of folks out there, and it is significant, hundreds and hundreds of jobs for multiple months. But yeah, the part of the reality is that you're not going to have 100 people on site once it's done. It's a low maintenance technology. You do have some people, and there's oversight and maintenance and operations and repairs and stuff like that, and it makes a difference in aggregate. But there's no, getting around the fact that there's not a lot of on-site jobs in perpetuity. Our argument is that in aggregate, it is a very large employment impact. It's just they're not at the same site all the time. To me, kind of like home building. Like obviously, a lot of people are employed building and repairing homes. They don't stay at your house once the house is done. Like, that's okay. But you don't say that nobody. There's no jobs in home building. Look, there's nobody at my house. Like that's not it. So it's just a matter of kind of conveying it in a way. And certainly we have statewide estimates, over 14,000 full and part-time jobs in solar, and we, look to do those surveys. So the impact is there, but just
phrasing the story.
Yeah.
What about on the manufacturing side? I mean,
have some manufacturing jobs here in Texas, and the more that gets built in Texas and domestically, the more kind of manufacturing I think comes along with that, and so we'll see more. It's likely not going to be ever a giant wedge of the total employment pie, because it just tends to have more people are in the construction and sales and rooftop installation. The other segments of the solar business tend to have more people in them than manufacturing, but that's an important wedge of the pie too.
And I could add my perspective. I work on the manufacturing side of the industry. And I think that right now, as you are bidding for the lowest cost of these projects, it becomes difficult to compete with manufacturing costs that are outside of the states. That's a tough economic battle that we have to deal with. But there's still companies like Mission Solar here in San Antonio that are boosting it up and providing some good product for a good price.
Yeah. And Juan's going to employ everybody, so it's cool.
Me and my big solar farm for everyone. We're just going to make a very sustainable neighborhood here.
For sure.
Yeah,
for sure. So I'll touch on some policy things and kind of the session as we have it. You all have been plugged in. The winter storm changed everything. Like it just it did. This is our agenda going into the session was already going to be kind of a weird session with COVID. We weren't sure, are we going to be in the building? Are they doing hearings? How's it work? So, our focus has been do no harm. Like the senator said, we're building a lot. Those charts I showed, a lot of great growth on both the distributed and the wholesale side. And so first and foremost, let's keep doing that. Don't get in the way of that awesome growth. We do want to extend the economic development programs that exist, the Chapter 13 program. I can talk about in a bit that has been around for a long time. Let's keep that. Let's not disrupt kind of what's helped get us to where we are. But other than that, we weren't looking at kind of giant new things. And then the winter storm hit and everybody wants to do electricity now. And so we had, 150 bills, I think, filed in a 2-week period before the deadline hit. So, like I said, we're tracking 320 bills. We did in the last session, 2019, 180 bills, 160 the session before that. So, almost a doubling of the bill activity. I'll run through a handful. It's a lot. It's too much. I've got 2 slides worth of bills. I'll just kind of hit the high points. But it's very dynamic because there's so much more activity in electricity than usual. What the senator said is true. Like you've got the bills, but then you've got amendment activity and different things moving. So there's no declarative statement about what's going to happen until sine die at the end of May. But first and foremost, the bill the senator mentioned, SB 398, heard this morning in B and C, I think will go well. This, like he said, made it almost to the finish line in the last session, died in calendars, and I think has broad support for this one. So just making it so that cities can't block solar that they can see from the street, some kind of egregious anti-solar rules, and then basic disclosures in the transaction so that customers know what they're getting. And as we grow, that we do that responsibly and make sure that people have good experiences. So that's important. Another DG bill that we're supporting and working on is just a clarification bill. As you all know, with solar, you can't have your property taxes raised because of the solar that you put on your roof, even though that's an asset, but you're not going to have to now pay more property taxes because of it. There's an on-site exemption for that. Some taxing jurisdictions aren't sure how to deal with third-party owned systems and leases, and should that have the same treatment. And so we're just there's a bill to clarify that yeah, it doesn't matter how you finance the system, it's the same, and yeah, that your property taxes should not go up because of that. So we're supporting SB 1029 by Huffman and a companion bill. That's what these slashes are, House and Senate companions. Usually companions are identical bills filed in each chamber that then go through each process and meet in the middle. It's usually a way that things go faster and smoother if you've got a hand in both sides of the legislature. Otherwise, one bill has to go to the other side and come back. And so it's good to have companions if you can. Working on HB 1607 by Darby and its companion by Hinojosa. This is a kind of an update to the rules around transmission approvals when it comes to economic projects. I won't get super in the weeds, but transmission investments have to be approved, and they can either be approved for reliability purposes or economic purposes. And this bill expands what goes into that economic calculation to make sure that consumers, who are the ultimate payers of transmission, are the ones who are benefiting. So looking for opportunities to save customers money. That's kind of why you want to have that test. And also do some critical infrastructure planning to basically get a speed up of some of the studies of proposed lines that have been done. A lot of congestion in transmission. That's been a growing concern for different companies. And so we're supporting that. And then SB 1281 by Hancock, also on transmission, similar in its intent of bringing the consumer into the calculus of what gets approved. So that was heard this morning. We supported that by Chairman Hancock. Mentioned Chapter 313, the tax limitation program. This is a program that has been around for a long time. It is set to expire at the end of next year if it's not extended. So a lot of stakeholders are coming together to work on this. Representative Murphy in the House has HB 1556, which extends the program for 10 years, makes a whole lot of changes, kind of updates the program. And so he laid that out on, that was yesterday. Lot going on. Did that, a lot of engagement on that, and working its way through. He's been working on Chapter 313 for a long time, and so this is one that will be following through the whole session. Along with that, there's a simple version of the Chapter 313 extension by Deshotel, HB 1502, just a 10-year extension, no change to the program, just to have that in there, and both of those will kind of go through the House process. And finally, on storage, SB 415 by Hancock with a companion in the House by Holland. This is actually also a refile from last session, or similar to, very, very similar to a bill from last session that also just ran out of gas at the very end and ran out of time. This allows utilities in Texas, the transmission and distribution utilities, to contract for a certain amount of storage capacity for reliability purposes if it is a cheaper option than building new lines and other infrastructure. So kind of gives them an opportunity to do that, with limitations on how much they can do, because stakeholders do have a concern about utilities owning or contracting for storage and getting rates of return on that. So there's been some limitation on that. And then one more page of stuff, and then we'll stop and ask, let folks dig in. Also on Chapter 313, on the Senate side, Chairman Birdwell from the Senate Natural Resource and Economic Development Committee also filed a Chapter 313 extension bill that extends the program for 10 years, but unfortunately kicks renewables out of the program. So this was a late breaking, kind of near to the filing deadline, bill that takes renewable energy out of eligibility from the program. And then he also filed SB 1256 that goes back to a different program, Chapter 312, that was extended in the last session, and says, oh, solar can't be in that either. So it's unfortunate, those provisions. He has some motivation to do that from the Lieutenant Governor, who is very interested in that, and we believe is doing some bigger negotiating and politicking around the role of renewables. And so having this bill out there is another way to have that conversation. So we heard those bills last week, defended solar, made our case, made the argument, and I think we'll keep fighting that battle. It will have to come together with the House bills. So there will be Chapter 313 conversations for the rest of the session, battle to the finish line. Our intent obviously is to extend the program and make sure solar is included, because otherwise, why bother? And just, I don't have a stat here on the slide, but without renewable energy, the Chapter 313 program is far less impactful geographically. The current program touches 146 counties. If you took renewable energy out of the program, that shrinks to 43 counties. Most of the counties that participate, or the school districts that participate, are in counties where renewable energy is the only thing that they're attracting to invest. You can't put, a large, you're not going to put a large chemical facility or a manufacturing facility or that sort of thing in very rural areas. You need people and other infrastructure. And so solar and wind have been, like was mentioned, really beneficial investments to those communities. SB 760 by Drew Springer filed a bill on decommissioning of solar facilities to some extent mirror what was passed in the last session for wind, to have certain requirements for end of life, end of contract. We're working with him on this to provide some feedback. Decommissioning is already pretty standard process within contracts between landowners and developers to kind of know what's going to happen at the end of the original lease period. And so similar to the disclosures in the Senator Menendez's bill, just looking to make sure that what's in there is, comports with good practice in the industry. And so we're working on that one. A couple of bills from today, also today's hearing, SB 1278 by Hancock on ancillary services. This is to some extent in response to the winter storm. Chairman Hancock is interested in managing the variability of the system, and frankly has some concern about wind. Just a thing. We have a lot of wind, no doubt, and they get really hung up on the nameplate capacity of wind being now 20 plus gigawatts, but in any given time it's producing less than that, as you would expect. And during certain times during the winter storm it was significantly less. And so just unfortunately kind of some thinking of, well, we have to firm that up, or we need them to do more things, and maybe ancillary services is the way to do that. So we're engaging on this. We were unfortunately had to be opposed to this bill. We don't like to oppose the chairman, but not as written, not good for solar, and always good to point out, like has been discussed, we procure ancillary services for the nuclear plant and for large steel mills and their load impacts and all sorts of reasons. Solar is actually a very small reason that you procure ancillary services. So, don't want to be discriminatory. And then SB 1282 by Hancock on generator interconnection. This is a concern that all transmission is socialized. So a generator that wishes to interconnect to the system, the cost to do that interconnection, any line addition that needs to be made to do that, or other infrastructure, is ultimately borne by all people and all ratepayers. So some concern that generators are not siting close enough to the system, or incurring too much cost, and maybe we need to have them pay for more of this. So we had to be opposed to this as well. Be a significant additional cost for solar. It's already a pretty high risk endeavor to do hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, and to upend kind of the way that we do transmission just for what is largely wind and solar that's being installed now is wouldn't be good. So working with him on that. At the hearing there were some ideas on how to mitigate that we want to engage in, so that one's not a done deal either. And then finally, these last three are kind of the bigger picture bills that I put them at the bottom. I probably should have put them at the top, because they are kind of the larger issues that have come up. Y'all probably saw SB 2142 by Schwartney, the big political battle that was happening about a week and a half ago around, were we going to reprice Thursday through Friday of the storm, and what would that mean? That bill was passed by the Senate and then not taken up by the House, so it's probably done at this point. But it was a very, that was right after the storm. We had hearings on what happened, and then this issue was kind of the first thing they really took up, and now they're getting into the rest of the reform issues, which is what SB 3 on the Senate side and a whole slate of bills on the House side are, that get to agency coordination, communication, preparations, planning, a variety of things. I wish I could tell you with a lot of certainty, this is going to be hugely dynamic until the end. There's committee substitutes being put forward on a lot of these bills. There's amendments added to the floor. You can see kind of the basics, but our interest will certainly be, don't hurt solar out of an interest to solve some other thing. Like we didn't do it. So we'll be, engaging throughout the rest of the session on that, and see how that goes. And finally, just put one more in here by Schwartner. this was something that was talked about even before the storm, and I think gained some steam, which is add more people to the commission. It's a 3-member commission because of open meeting rules. No 2 of them could talk outside of an open meeting, which kind of makes coordination pretty hard. So, you know, this would add 2 new members, so it would be a 5-member commission. And so that passed the Senate and could be a component of the House activity. So in terms of the reform efforts, governance is a big part of it. And we heard some bills today in Senate B and C about ERCOT governance, kind of who is overseeing these important agencies and what does that look like. So that's all of that. And that's all I had. I have some detailed slides on taxes in 313 if you care to see that, but I'll stop and let folks ask questions.
Thanks, Charlie. I think that was a very comprehensive summary, and I'm glad that we're able to kind of get to the bottom of each bill's summarization and whether it's good or bad. I think that a question that came up from Matt was if you could describe the bills that you like the most and the bills that you hate the most, maybe 2 of each, you know, and then I think that would also tackle on with like, what can we do, which is Nancy's question, as a follow-up to have our voices be the loudest.
Yeah. You know, I think taking the latter, I think, you know, we'll know more as things progress on individual bills. You know, I think it's always valuable to just talk about how solar is important. It's a small but growing part of the mix. It helps diversify the portfolio. It produces well. We can plan for it. We know it. It's clean. You know, all the things that y'all know about solar, just to continue to make it a part of the conversation and rebut, you know, concern like, well, you know, you can't rely on it. No, you actually can. Like, we know what it does. We know how it's going to produce. We can plan for things. And, you know, the point I made in the hearing today was we hear a lot of talk about, well, you know, solar and wind, they need to procure some backup because, you know, you don't know what they're going to do. The reality is the grid is the backup for every generator. Every generator backs up every other generator at every moment. And there are thousands of thermal generator outages every year, thousands, you know, a plant here, boiler there, steam turbine, you know, a people issue, and then thousands of times when the plant isn't producing as much as they thought at D rate. So the entire fleet is intermittent. It's not that solar is intermittent and everybody else is rock solid the same all the time. That's not reality. And the benefit of being interconnected is that then if one thing happens in one place, it can be supplemented somewhere else. So making sure that solar and wind aren't seen as this uniquely unreliable intermittent thing. Like, no, that's not how it goes. So yeah, just tell solar's good story. That's what's important, that you want it politically, you know, that it works well, all that stuff. In terms of favorites, you know, I think I more or less organized this by likes. The bottom ones are, you know, the bigger picture ones, but they kind of got worse over time, as you saw. So, you know, we definitely want to see these DG bills go through. The transmission stuff is good, making sure that we're evaluating projects effectively for greatest economic impact. Do want to see the Chapter 313 program extended. Representative Murphy's changes are good. And they do address the jobs issue. I will point that out since we talked about it. The current program has a jobs creation requirement that you can get a waiver for if you know, your technology just doesn't produce the kind of jobs that are required. What this bill does, it takes away the requirement and the waiver and puts a requirement on everybody to make a certain contribution to wages. And either you make that contribution or you provide funding to the state for that. And so it's kind of a way to get around the jobs concern and just say, look, every project will make a contribution to the workforce in one way or another. Mm-hmm. So it does that and a bunch of other things. So we support that bill, support Hancock's storage bill. So those are all good. You know, the bills that would put specific new cost or change the market to be detrimental for solar would be unfortunate. That's not what we're looking for. So don't want to have a big ancillary services requirement that doesn't make sense, or big new fees on interconnection. Don't want to be kicked out of the Chapter 313 program. So those are some of our defense things. So, but it's a long session. We're going to continue to make our argument as we get further away from the winter storm and they get involved in other things. Hopefully some of the steam to really drag down renewables will go down, and cooler heads will prevail and be like, look, solar is an important part of this mix. Don't inhibit. But floor activity in the House and the Senate at the 11th hour, there's going to be things. We fought off some bad amendments on the Senate floor at the tail end of last session. Expect to do it this session. So stay tuned.
Now, what do you feel like is the most effective way of us communicating, whether it is, our understanding of how the grid can be a source of storage and battery, or whether it's like, communicating the science things? If it's more on a written sense, posting things online, more of a, hey, I got to pick up my phone and call, my representative, or kind of as Senator was saying, let's just do a mass marketing campaign. What do you feel would be the most effective way to show support for these ideas that are being discussed?
That's a tough question. It's probably case by case. I think you can always be doing broad solar outreach. You can always be doing education around the role that solar plays and the benefits it brings. And then on the bill specific stuff, it's a little bit more targeted in the mobilization. So no singular answer, but I think just hammering home on the benefits of solar. And the senator was right. Like Chairman Hancock's rhetoric has gotten, I think, better when it comes to solar. He said some very nice things about solar in the hearing today, and wind. And I think he's probably hearing from stakeholders that hey, this can't all be an anti-wind and anti-solar reform situation. So he acknowledges the benefits of economic development and diversification, and solar and wind are extraordinarily low cost. Like when they're on the grid, they bring prices down for consumers, and so that's great. You should be wanting to facilitate every bit of that you can. If money was falling in your yard, you would take as much of it as you could. Like, yes, yeah. I will take every bit of the free money that you're giving me. Not that solar is free. It costs a lot to produce and to do it, but the marginal cost, the fuel is free. And so it really does bring kind of downward pressure to the market. And, it's in the interest of Texas to have a lot of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to kind of like just shoot you a series of questions that have come up, and I've kind of set them on the list, being mindful of time as well. And then maybe at the end, there is kind of a slide that Matt has shared with us about blackout planning versus reality. So if you guys want to stick around a little bit. So first off, there's a question from Chris. Is there an effort that you know of removing the Texas Railroad Commission from the controlling energy?
No. Just to be straightforward, like, no, the senator was right. Like, they're a very powerful institution. And yeah, I think they're I'm confident that they are going through some internal look at what they can do better, and they'll have some, I think, things that come out in the bills that they'll be required to do. But I don't see major agency reform at the Railroad Commission. There were some bills filed about merging the Public Utility Commission and the Railroad Commission and that sort of thing. That doesn't appear to be getting a lot of support. I think they're going to be separate agencies, just with maybe some requirements to coordinate better, some planning, communications, that sort of thing.
Okay. Speaking specifically about SB 415 and HB 1672, do you see the limit of 40 megawatts of storage as problematic?
Well, it depends on who you are and what you want. So I believe that number may increase a bit, but the thought there was, this is a new framework kind of giving T&D utilities this direct connection to contracting for this capacity, and doing it in a different way. And so folks thought, let's put a number, a cap, so it doesn't get out of control, and we don't see like utilities using a new mechanism to go, get a lot of new revenue that they shouldn't. Since again, the competitive market, all the other generators want to make sure that they are the ones providing reliability services, not separate contracts with the utility that have rate of return associated. So, limited thought being, see how it goes, expand if necessary. It's actually a fairly tailored or a fairly narrow usage. Like there's still storage that will be deployed outside of that bill, outside of that construct. And so it may never be needed exactly in the way that bill contemplates. But again, things move very quickly. 2 years ago when we were working on this bill, was a lot less storage, a lot less development. And so, 2 years in a rapidly developing technology space is a long time. Solar picture looks a lot different now than it did 2 years ago, and the storage picture does too.
Yeah. So kind of sticking on that theme, but kind of talking more about the ancillary service costs and how that's spreading, is that the duck curve is a real phenomenon in California, right? But is there arguably a real issue that merits a fair solution? I'm not sure, Matt, if you could expand a little bit there, kind of what you're seeking for the question there about the duck curve. It is related to storage, right? As to how that's becoming a big issue in California and other parts where there's large solar adoption.
Sorry, it took me a while to find the button to unmute. So in California, the duck curve is a real phenomena. It does impose real cost on the system because of that rapid evening transition from when solar is producing and meeting all the demands and then falls off. Texas's situation is very distinct, of course, because we have a very distinct geographic placement between our east to west production and demand centers. So we can thank the CREZ lines and that our circumstance is not as significant, is not as problematic. So it's kind of I guess I'd phrase it as a generic, kind of an open-ended question. What's the fairest way to begin assigning ancillary costs? Because there are real, each primary energy source has its issues. None of them is perfect.
Solar is perfect.
Solar is very nearly perfect in Texas. I will grant you that. It's very nearly perfect in Texas. So what's the right way to frame the whole discussion of ancillary services top to bottom? If we were to start with a clean slate, top to bottom, what would you recommend we do?
That's a big question. I think ancillary services have worked well. What I'm excited about is the real-time co-optimization effort. We're going to be updating the way that we procure ancillary services in a more sophisticated way that enables more to participate. So right now, solar doesn't provide ancillary services, but we are technologically capable of doing so. And the market will be evolving in 2024 to allow us to do so, or to kind of enable us to do so. Looking forward to that. Ancillary services are meant to support grid reliability for various contingencies. If a large generator trips, if load is higher than expected, if frequency issues happen on the grid because a large steel plant cranked on an arc furnace. So there's a lot of different reasons for that. Ancillary services isn't a huge market. They procure about 5,000 megawatts of ancillary services. The duck curve is a California phenomenon. Texas is going to look different. Certainly the sun will come up and go down. A couple of things really mitigate us from California. Our east-west orientation, California is very north-south, so that the sun goes down quickly across their land, whereas ours, it's much smoother kind of getting across the landscape. We have a lot of wind in multiple geographic areas that helps balance that, particularly the coastal wind that helps balance that. And right now there's still far less solar than there is in California. So they're years ahead of us in terms of capacity. But I think that even when we get there in terms of capacity, we've got some of those attributes that it won't be so pronounced. And it won't necessarily be ancillary services that is the mechanism. We'll see how many market reforms get through. We have an energy only market, which means if you're generating, you get paid. If you're not, you don't. And so the duck curve in Texas would just represent a market opportunity. Hey, there's a need for power generation at this hour. And if you're a generator that can produce at that time, go for it. Definitely calls for, other generators able to do that, or more storage storage on its own, storage with other resources, being able to use that. So the market, in theory, in Texas is designed to kind of already mitigate that, where prices will signal if we need the power. Obviously, the winter storm, opened up a lot of questions about that.
Charlie, you gave a great answer to the question. I asked you a tough question. You gave a very good answer. And I just wish we could all calm down and decide what kind of market design we want to deliver the needs we see that we have. And if we could incorporate the trend of climate change in our predictions of what we need, we'd be in very good shape. So thanks.
Yeah. And that, we haven't talked about climate change a whole lot. I know, the folks on this call are champions on that. Kaiba and others are awesome out there. That's a big and tough part of the conversation. And politically, it's just tough. Like when a large number of the legislators just aren't engaged with that as a thing that has to be reckoned with. It's not, we reckon with various aspects of the market and the pricing and generation, all these things. But unfortunately, planning for more extreme futures is not really a thing that is tops on the list just yet. And so any advocacy on that front is helpful too, just to say, hey, look, when we do scenario planning for seasons, we can't just use the worst it's ever been as the worst case scenario, because it may get worse than that. Like that's what we saw this winter, was that we had extreme scenario planting at ERCOT, and we had more outages, higher load, less wind, like on every front, it was more extreme than the extreme scenarios. And so a lot of it is just make sure that we're seeing what's possible so that we can plan to that.
So before I jump into the, and you're absolutely right about what you're saying, is that we need to kind of like change a little bit about how we're forecasting things and the scale of that. Before jumping more into broader subjects, I want to make sure that Kristen and Kaiba got their questions answered about SB 415 and House Bill 1672 regarding storage. If there's anything else you guys wanted to know about that was mentioned previously.
No, I think he explained it enough for me.
Okay, you got it. So a couple of other larger things that came up were about there's more conversations that have been happening about labor, specifically with solar renewables. What's the opinion about the unionization of renewable energy workers? Is there much of a conversation that happens on your end, or an opinion in general?
Honestly, we haven't had a whole lot of, at the association level, just because things have to kind of bubble up in aggregate with other folks on that. And so it hasn't been something, Texas isn't quite as active on the union front as other states. And so hasn't been something we've worked on to great extent, but keep my eyes and ears open.
Okay. And then are there any policies that you see that will encourage neighborhood solar cooperatives?
Neighborhood solar cooperatives. Nothing in particular, but go forth and conquer. I support that.
Okay. That sounds good. If there's anybody else who has a question or that I've kind of missed, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. I think that we're kind of running 5 minutes over, so I want to be respectful of Charlie's time. But I want to make sure that we take advantage of this opportunity we have to hear from somebody that has boots on the ground. Or on the podium, really.
Mhm. They've heard enough from me. They're like, this guy talks too much. Get him out of here.
Hey, I like the graphs though. You know, I like what you're showing, and you know, I think that there is kind of a note here from Annalicia, who's part of the staff at with Senator Menendez's office. It says that something we can really do is work more with local elected officials, and that would be the best way to support and broaden that message about climate change and climate related policies, you know, so the locals can then move the state leader. So, you know, I definitely want to recognize Colette for speaking up at her city council and kind of bringing the message and sharing with us that resistance that was faced, you know, and knowing that you have a support group here, right? It's like we can work with one another. And I think that's one of the purposes of Solar Ross, is to kind of create this space of community and making sure that united we can, you know, uniformly kind of push the boundaries there and move the needle forward. Thank you guys, everyone. Charlie, I really appreciate your time today,
Awesome.
giving us that update. You know, I think it was timely and, you know, needed as we continue to push for as much change as possible so we can see more solar out there and harness the power of the sun. So
thanks so much, Juan, and thanks all the Solar Austin crew. Good to see y'all, and we'll see you out there, hopefully in person soon at Schultz's or some other place.
that sounds good. We'll keep you posted.
Keep
All
up
right,
the good
thanks y'all.
work.
Have a good night.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good job, Juan.
Oh, and Juan, we still have Matt's slides.
Oh, yes,
Like,
please.
around.
Thanks for reminding me. I do want to see that.
Oh, definitely. And I could share those on my screen. There we go.
And I'll admit in advance of the slides to saying I'm a little puzzled. Oh, is this what I just sent? Oh, it is what I just sent. All right. Just for the benefit of everybody else in attendance, this was me being snarky. These are slides I'd produced because I'd been asked to make presentations, and I sent them to the Solar Austin board, not strictly to be internal slides, but I didn't expect them to be shared now. So, all right, I'll take advantage of the forum that you guys have inadvertently offered me just to say, I don't know, I'm going to give my take on events. So this is literally a slide I produced maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was my take. I don't know if you can magnify it so it's easier to see. It's not bad. You can see it.
Yeah, we can see clearly.
You can review it at your leisure. It really was a very tough physical Mother Nature giving us a big challenge situation. And personally, this may be a unique take, but my take is ERCOT is to be complimented. And so this is just me speaking on my own behalf. ERCOT is to be complimented. They were given a very tough circumstance. And so I will echo what the senator said. Magnus came across as kind of cold and analytic to his own detriment. But he did not a horrible job. If you're given a horrible situation and you walk out of it, maybe you should be complimented for having done that. And so I guess what I'm going to emphasize, if you look at demand, that's a 50% jump in demand. What they were anticipating and what they got, 50% jump in demand. And then if you look at the supply numbers, it's about a 30% drop in what you thought you were going to have and had. So look at that, 50% jump, a third drop, and we didn't have a blackout. I'm going to compliment ERCOT. I mean, that's astounding. That's a tough challenge. And the fact that the grid didn't black out is an impressive accomplishment. And so think about the grid, our electrical grid. This is something that we cobbled together over time. And I use the word cobbled intentionally because it's this, you keep adding things to it in a somewhat ad hoc fashion, and you're creating a bigger and bigger machine. And this machine has never been turned off.
Hmm.
Since the day it was built, we've never turned it off. How many times have you had to say, crap, my iPhone sucks and it's weird, it's acting weird, and you turn it off and you turn it back on and it works better and you're happier. You don't get to do that with our electric grid. It just, it's expected to continue running. It's 100 years old and never been turned off. And so ERCOT practices this as an emergency scenario. If we have to turn off the grid, how do we restart? It's an exercise that's never been demonstrated in practice. And so it's impressive. It's impressive. So I don't want to come down too hard on ERCOT. They, certainly they were part of the problem, but they weathered the problem. And so I'm going to step out only in my own behalf and say, if there's fault to be found, it's because all of us take for granted the services of the systems that we have built in terms of what they deliver us. It's very easy to say, the light turns on, turned on. It should, and that is true. It should, but there's a lot of effort behind that. There's just a lot of effort behind it. If you're going to show the other slide, let's go ahead and do that.
I do have a question here, Matt. A couple of things that come up though is that we show that this wind and solar produce more than 90% of the promised power that it delivered. Something to highlight too is the quote that you said right here is like gas is failing in the most spectacular fashion right now, and kind of tying it back with what Charlie was presenting is that we don't see a decline in gas or coal generation, maybe just an increase in future solar generation. And I think it's just like maybe proportional to maybe the amount of energy that is being consumed and the amount of people that will come into Texas. What do you think? Anything to say there about like how like gas is failing in the most spectacular fashion? Is it just because?
I chose that quotation simply because Dr. Weber is a professor at UT. I would characterize him as the local energy rock star. He deserves that title. But it's a true observation. Natural gas is the largest deliverer of our energy services. It just is. And when they failed in the wintertime, it is the expected delivery source. There's no expectation that wind and solar are going to be the largest deliverer of energy at that seasonal time, because they have a seasonal expectation of delivery that we understand, that's pretty well characterized. ERCOT specifically has graphics that have a day ahead prediction for what solar and wind are going to produce, because we understand that they are situational delivery sources. And so it's really a question of, did they deliver less than we expected because our ability to predict is insufficient? In the early days of both solar and wind, that was a problem. But reality is our ability to assess what they are going to deliver is much improved. And that's really what this graph reflects, this chart that I admit I'd made, but I made it from public data sources, and I kind of described where I got them from. If anybody spots an error, share it with me. I'd love to know. But I think this chart was a pretty good reflection of what happened in the critical day.
Yeah, this could be something that we could definitely share with wider channels, because it looks like the center needed these sort of resources and talking points.
Yeah,
right.
And so this next chart is really kind of a question. Statewide elected officials in Texas. I just went to Wikipedia and picked this up. Who's in charge of our state? And this is what you find on Wikipedia. These are the people who are elected and the roles that they fill. And it's dated, it's Wikipedia. So the data is not current. But as a structure, I think it's an accurate description of our governance structure with respect to energy delivery. And that's what we're talking about this evening. So the state legislature with Dan Patrick, it is the authoritative body. We have a weak governor structure. So Dan Patrick runs the show as much as he wants to or doesn't want to at any given moment. that is the structure. Governor Abbott has a great deal of control over dictating what topics are deemed important and what we discuss. And the Railroad Commission, there's not very many statewide elected officials. They are 3 of them, and they make up the Texas Railroad Commission. So I think on the topic of energy, what I've displayed here is just kind of an accurate description of what was meant to be as of a few months ago. And so my kind of question, it's kind of an open question. I'd be curious if anybody actually has an answer to it. Why isn't TERC, the Texas Energy Reliability Council, a bigger topic of discussion? Everyone targeted ERCOT, but I think in a fair assessment, it's kind of a 3rd tier player. It's not the 2nd tier. It's not an elected official. It's a 3rd tier player. Why isn't TERC, which actually is meant to be a unifying body where everyone who has an interest in how natural gas interplays with our electricity generation, why hasn't that been a bigger topic of discussion? It was actually a bigger topic of discussion in the 2011 blackout, but it's been pretty absent in this one. And I don't understand why, because it was proven to be problematic back then, and now they're getting a buy. And I don't really understand why they're getting a buy. So it's kind of my naivete being displayed here in a very public fashion, by the way, as to why that is.
It's a very strong question that you ask, because ERCOT has been kind of maybe at the center of all press that has happened around like the storm, and TERC is just this acronym that, for many of us, I think that this is the first time we hear it.
Yeah, and that quotation I display is taken from the TERC website. So that is what that's their mission. And
it is all encompassing, right?
It's a self-described mission.
Yeah. I think that's a good question. I don't know if anyone else has an answer for that, but it leaves us pondering as to like, hey, how can we have these conversations more often, whether it's in the industry or in our neighborhoods, because maybe we're just approaching the situation from the wrong angle. So I think that it's very enlightening, Matt, and I want to see what we can do to at least share the first slide, posted on our LinkedIn, Facebook, and social media channels. I encourage everyone else to do the same once they see it up there. But I don't know if there's any sort of questions. Yeah, and Alicia, I think she already took off. Yeah, so she would like to see this too, Matt. This is like from the senator's office to just send these slides over to her.
Okay, Juan, I guess I'd ask you the favor to make sure I have her email in hand, and I'm happy to share these slides. And again, if anybody spots error in them, help me correct them.
Here you go. This will be for everyone else that's left. Thank you guys for sticking on, even 20 minutes afterwards. I know that Colette enjoy her crackers. I'm getting hungry myself.
Totally checking out. Do y'all mind if I get a copy of those slides too to send to Senator Camel?
Yeah, the 2 that we just presented.
I mean, I took screenshots, but it's cut off at the very bottom.
No, I'd be happy to send them to you.
Thanks.
So I'm matt.s.weldon@gmail.com. It's a fairly intuitive email.
You can think of Matt as a very humble scientist that has a lot of knowledge that is just waiting to get out to the world. And sometimes like, Matt, go, share it. So I don't know if you guys have any other questions, but thank you guys again for attending. Or send us a message if there's anything that comes up. We'll be probably editing the video before posting on YouTube, and then you guys will receive the recording tomorrow. So have a great rest of the night. And looking forward to seeing you next month. We'll be having, hopefully, I think we'll be having Tim Harvey from Austin Energy join us to speak a little bit more about commercial solar and things that are happening in Austin Energy. So looking forward to it, and have a great rest of the month for the last day or so that it is. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you all. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Thanks, Juan. Great job.
You got it.